Welcome to the Centre for Legal Leadership and to Financial CrimeCast. I'm Sam Tate, Head of White Collar Crime and Compliance at the law firm RPC. And in this series, we will have the pleasure of speaking with leaders in the field of financial crime, compliance and ethics to discuss their experiences, what they've learned along the way, and what financial crime issues they see on the horizon. In this episode, we are joined by Fidelis Omozuapo, a leading subject matter expert on Africa in the business intelligence sector and CEO of Adeste Advisory. Fidelis, a great pleasure to have you on Financial CrimeCast.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be invited to speak on this platform.
It's particularly nice to have you on the series because we worked together at Exeter some years ago, and I've seen your career, which was already in a great place, go from strength to strength. So thank you for giving us a little bit of your time. Thank you for giving us a little bit of your time. There are a few questions we're going to go through today, a starting point for what I hope will be a really interesting discussion about your experience and what you can share with us. And if you don't mind, we'll start with the first of those questions. Perhaps you can tell us about your journey in compliance and financial crime. How did you find yourself in this field?
Sam, thanks once again for having me on this platform. I think it's incredible when I look back in terms of how I started this journey in the financial crime compliance sector. It all began while working with the Archbishop of Canterbury, Rowan Williams, working very closely with David Peck, who headed the Archbishop's Office for International Development. And I was advising Lambeth Palace on relationship building of trust between Lambeth and the Anglican Communion in Africa. And I understood from that experience that trust and integrity mattered a lot. That's not just within the confines of evangelical or faith-based enterprises, but also in the private sector. So it wasn't a surprise when Aegis Defense Services was building an Africa practice, and they needed a subject matter expert who understood Africa very well. The nuances, the conceptualizations, the context behind the risk as well. And they asked me to join them to help develop that capability. The timing of that was quite good because it was just at the beginning of the last financial crisis in February 2008. And many of the companies, as you would know, Sam, I've made loads of mistakes in terms of pricing risk, in terms of not conducting proper due diligence reporting, in terms of KYC being very lacking in depth. And all that kind of risk coalesced together led to the financial crisis in many ways. And so companies were looking for more robust compliance solutions. And they were putting a lot of premium on subject matters expert rather than generalists. And I was brought in with a particular specialism in Africa to help companies, especially in the financial services sector, unpick what those risks are in the financial services in investing into Africa, particularly, and to support individuals in senior management positions make very informed decisions when it comes to compliance and financial crime and decisions.
Well, thank you. And as we look back on that starting point of your career, I think it's fascinating how you started. I can't think of anybody else who started working for the Anglican Communion and then found themselves doing due diligence reports and advising on financial crime. So that is truly unique. And if we look back at the start of your career, are there 3 bits of advice you'd give to your younger self, knowing what you know now?
There are 3 things that comes to mind. The first thing is the fact that you don't know everything. And I think one, in spite of being a specialist in this sector and this geography, sometimes there's the deception that your specialism allows you to put forward the idea that you are an authority in that market. That is not often the case. One has to leave room for the fact that there are things that are very fluid and which no one knows about, which I don't know about. And the solution to this, and this is what I've learned, is to collaborate with others, to work in partnership with other subject matter experts, to work with people who are professionals and authority in their own field, to be able to get the real insight that informs the client about the nature of the risk and the solution that they should be seeking. A lot of the time we make mistakes in terms of depending on experts, but there's also the need to depend and rely heavily on authorities in the field. There's a distinction between expert and authorities. Expert are people who are trained in a particular field. Authorities, in my view, are people whose knowledge of that field is based on experience, not just on training alone. And I think depending and relying on the support of both people who are authorities in particular field and sectors and those who are expert really allows you to advise, to come across as a trusted advisor. That's one of the things I would say to my younger self. The other thing I would say is that to always focus on two things, no matter what you do, and two questions. What is the integrity risk in terms of this situation? Where can I identify the weakness when it comes to integrity risk or reputational risk connected to this investment, connected to this relationship? And not to lose sight of that, because that's what impacts on every business. The loss of integrity in some ways equals to the loss of revenue, and in many ways equals to the loss of shareholders' value. And not to be cognizant of all these three can lead to a lot of adverse media, inevitably. And the other point is to always build a relationship of trust with whomever you're dealing with. And that's one of the three things I would say to my younger self, whether it's on the client side or with your colleagues or with third-party collaborators. Always allow the basis for that relationship to be one of trust, because in that way, people can feel comfortable to tell you things that you necessarily don't want to hear, but would in any way help you or help them.
Thank you. No, that's really, really interesting. And is there anything you tell your younger self to avoid?
I would tell my younger self to avoid people who claim to know everything. Because from experience, I've found out that people who claim to know everything tend not to know anything. And and also, and this is one lesson possibly everyone should learn when it comes in particular to Africa. Because somebody wants something now doesn't mean that they're going to give it to you now. Especially with regards to Africa. A lot of the time, state-owned enterprises, African transnational corporations themselves, in many ways, they are relatively blue chips company because they want compliance support today doesn't mean that they would sign on the dotted lines immediately. So there's a lot of patience capital that one needs to develop over years, and to understand that whilst the client has a strong need for the services you provide, one has to manage the expectation and bridge the gap between their understanding of the imperative and the timeliness of the solutions that they are seeking for, and when the clients, are prepared to embrace or accept that solution in terms of its execution.
Well, I certainly agree with that, and actually, there's quite a neat segue into the next topic that we can discuss together. And that's this question, which is, what do you see as the three current trends in financial crime and compliance, particularly as they relate to Africa?
That's an excellent question, Sam. I think the first and obvious one is artificial intelligence. I know it sounds very obvious, but it is true. To answer that question with regards to Africa, it hasn't really caught up yet, and it's going to take a long time for the use of artificial intelligence to provide answers to complex questions with regards to financial crime compliance, with regards to anti-bribery corruption report writing and the investigation that supports. There are some development that is taking place in terms of data gathering and data management in Africa within the fintech space, but it hasn't really come down to the traditional banking space. A lot of the things that takes place within the traditional banking space is very heavily reliant on people. That's not to say some banks, especially in any country, the top 2 or 3 banks would have invested heavily in technology, in data management, and they will be doing well. But the vast majority of the traditional banks in Africa, or SMEs, mortgage bankings, those ones haven't really caught up with AI, and they're going to struggle. And because they're going to struggle, a lot of the SMEs, a lot of the unbanked individuals that exist within that space are not captured. And so that continues to pose a risk to financial crime and compliance. The second trend I have noticed is that some people are not going to like me for what I'm going to say next, but I think there are a lot of young people within the financial services sector in terms of the compliance and the financial crime investigation. I do not think that employers are investing a lot in terms of bridging the gap between human-led investigations and artificial intelligence-led investigation. So these individuals, young as they are, vibrant and really keen to learn, organically just want to do AI-led. They want to go on Google, the first check is on Facebook and other platforms, but it doesn't come to them naturally to invest time in speaking with the individuals behind those risks, getting to understand why has this person committed this crime? What are the precedents that led to the to that crime taking place in the first place? Is there a history to that? What is the context behind that crime? I think a lot of the young people, and it's not their fault really, I think there's training in that regard that companies need to do, is to marry both the old school way of doing financial fraud investigation or compliance investigation with the use of artificial intelligence. And I think young people would really benefit heavily from that. The third issue, or the third trend I've noticed, it's Bitcoin. I mean, it sounds very sexy as a term to use. And I think a lot of young Africans, especially in diaspora, are exploring the options of how to trade on Bitcoin. But I think no one really knows to what extent financial crimes control allows us to manage the risk that is inherent in that space. And my concern is that if Bitcoin becomes mainstream in the African market, we would be missing a trick here, because there's a lot of risk in that area, in that jurisdiction. And if that risk are then overtaken or gets Bitcoin involved as part of that risk, it becomes something that we can imagine the potential terrorists would use, the potential money launderers would employ as a platform, the individuals who want to siphon money or integrate the process of crime would find it that the lack of compliance and the lack of check that is provided around Bitcoin allows them to get away with the crime that they commit. Having said that, there are latest development that PayPal might be using Bitcoin beginning from 2021. And as a result, the level of scrutiny would increase when PayPal starts to use Bitcoin. No one knows whether that is true or not. I would advise that regulators really need to focus on that before it becomes mainstream, not just in Africa, but in Latin America, in the Middle East, in parts of the world where there's not so much supervision in terms of financial crimes and compliance.
Well, thank you. Those are all very, very interesting ideas. And certainly that point around the interaction between structured data or data review and the authorities, people who really know the people in the countries, is a really interesting area. And there's a big difference between knowing things and understanding them. And in our discussions together, I thought you've always helped me bridge that gap when trying to piece together things. What do all these bits really tell us, and who do we find to test those different theories about what's happening? And I'm glad that you're engaged with teaching that skill set, which is, not an easy one to acquire. As we're moving on to the next question, which is also looking at risks and themes, but in a slightly different way. I wondered what your thoughts were on dealing with financial crime risk in the 2020s, having particular regard now to the impact of COVID-19.
Sam, again, that's another good question. Two points here with regards to financial crimes and COVID-19. And I've seen this in with regards to the work I do on a daily basis, supporting clients and individuals. Some of these are high net worth individuals anyway. And there's been a lot of desperation and disenchantment following the lack of confidence in government in various parts of the world. I mean, confidence in government is at an all-time low at the moment. And what that has created is that people feel very disenchanted, and there are fraudsters who are preying on this disenchantment. And many of the time, and this has been subject of our investigation, is that people who are in their 60s, who are pensioners or young students coming into London, these fraudsters creating phantom networks, platform, website, are offering these pensioners, these young people, opportunities to invest in various platforms. And as a result, defrauding these people in their 50s and 60s, and the young, very impressionable people who have left home for the first time, coming to the UK or to the US to study. And many people are falling victim of this kind of fraud. And I don't know what the government is doing about it. I don't get a sense that anyone, other than the NCA maybe, is really focused on kind of tracking confidence fraud that is taking place, targeted at elderly people and young people going away from home for the first time who are desperate. And those cases have increased since COVID. I think, for me, those are the main concerns that I would worry about. And I think it will continue up until 2021.
That's really interesting. I mean, in a way, we're going to see lots of financial crime that was there. But now we see it because companies collapse, so there's auditors or whistleblowers, and so we discover this level of financial crime, which was always there. But I agree that a financial crisis of the sort brought on by COVID-19 is going to create hundreds of thousands of people in desperate need who will be targeted by financial crime criminals. And I thought this might play out in kind of Ponzi schemes, which is kind of analogous to what you're talking about, pyramid selling and so on. So you'll get some of those falling over because you can't recruit enough people at the bottom to make the system work. But you'll also have the right circumstances for new ones starting. For those kind of frauds. And so we can expect to see those starting up. And it will be interesting to know what the authorities are going to try and do to deal with them.
Well, I also think it creates a sort of an existential threat in the sense that these youngsters living home for the first time will just pile on more debt on their credit card. And one wonders what they would do next, because you're away from the support of your parents. In a foreign land or possibly in a foreign city, in a new city. So parents are themselves very exposed to this COVID-19 and many have lost their job. It should just be good to know that someone is really tracking this and making sure that this is being captured in a database somewhere nationally. Yeah.
And can I ask, do you think that this is a problem that's a particular concern for the Africa diaspora, which you spoke about earlier, and if it's getting the focus that it should do?
No, it is a concern for some of them, and they don't understand the market, especially for those whose parents have never been, or they themselves have never traveled abroad. People under pseudonyms and fictitious account offering rent of one property to 5 people. And because it is affordable, you have students kind of feeling very attracted to that rent. And all the digital banks as well. I don't think they, in some ways, are exonerated from this. I think there has to be a stronger way to ensure that the KYC that is conducted instills a lot of confidence and trust that the money that one has in those banks and will continue to represent the financial status of these students, really. Another one, it's relationship fraud. We don't see it now anyway, but at the beginning of COVID-19, between March and I would say up until June, because many people were at home themselves, whether you're pensioners or young adults, they were fraudsters on the internet professing love to people and relationship, and all this was just to siphon money from these individuals. The trend I am seeing at the moment is that has somewhat reduced. But I think if we have a second wave, if the second wave continues into the new year and more people are spending time at home rather than going out, you might find this emotional blackmail taking place again.
I think that all the conditions are right for that. I see that again, more vulnerable people, and then the mode of communication has so shifted, and perhaps that will suit criminals and on the cyber side in particular. Well, Fidelis, thank you very much. Thank you again for spending your time with us on Financial CrimeCast. It's always a pleasure speaking with you. I'm glad to see you looking so well, and really grateful for your insights.
Thank you, Sam, for having me. Thanks a lot.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.